I developed an eating disorder, if I'm thinking back, around the time I was 10 or 11 years old. I had a really rough year that year of middle school. I had my godmother died. Like I was being bullied actively by a lot of people. I was a young gay man who wasn't out, so that also didn't help. And I just, things got very bad very quickly. But I never identified them as that. I also grew up around diet culture. And I was also body dysmorphic far before that. I think dating back to elementary school, I had severe issues with the way I looked. And I I am a performer. I got into Baltimore School for the Arts High School, which is an auditioned performing arts high school in Baltimore, where Tupac and Jada Pinkett Smith attended. It's a really fantastic institution. I love it there. And that kind of furthered this career of being an actor, seeing my body as something that had to look a certain way in order for me to have a career, as well as while I was there, I came out as gay. And a lot of the gay community, a lot of the experience of being a member of the gay community is criticism of your body, criticism of your diet, and criticism of your sex appeal, even from a young age. And I got through high school, luckily, and I auditioned for a musical theater program. I am getting a BFA in musical theater. And unfortunately, that came with 8 a.m. ballet every morning where I was looking in the mirror and actively getting worse. Because, you know, in ballet class, you are supposed to be focusing on your technique, focusing on the artistry, focusing on expression within this very rigid form. And I ended up just focusing, for the most part, on the way my body looked at any given moment and not wanting to, just like body checking at the bar is unhelpful. And I went vegetarian for the environment, in quotation marks, because it wasn't. Like it was, but it definitely was just a restriction and a new manifestation of my eating disorder. And it was immediately very hard because I quickly found out I knew nothing about nutrition, and that I was a vegetarian who just wasn't really eating any vegetables. I went to the registered dietitian here at my university, and I was like, I don't think I am eating vegetarian well, and I would like to talk to you about it. And I got to talking to her about my history with food, my ideas about nutrition, how I interacted with food on a daily basis. And she was like, wow, it seems like you've got a lot going on that I don't have the qualifications to diagnose you with. So I'm going to send you to someone who can, and then you can come back to me. So she hooked me up with my therapist who specializes in eating disorder recovery. And the two of them are my team. They diagnosed me with an eating disorder about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. And I continued to struggle with my eating disorder because it was not one of the ones that you learn about in middle school. You know, I was like, I don't think that this is threatening my life, and did not consider that it was absolutely decimating my quality of life. And was like, well, if it's not life threatening, I don't need to do anything about it. And also, I had this idea that if I didn't continue to have this terrible relationship with food, that I would no longer have any sex appeal within the gay community. And I would also never book work as an actor in musical theater, because I've been to countless workshops and heard from countless directors that they take into full consideration how your body looks when they're casting you. And then the world shut down. I was studying abroad in Rome. I was Working on my relationship with food while there. Luckily, Italy has a much better culture around food than the United States. They have a pretty rigid schedule for when it's appropriate to eat what meal, and it's encouraged there to eat. And I was doing really well with that. I was starting to really love food and not be so I was really healing my relationship with food, but not in a permanent way. It was very situational. And then the world shut down. Italy shut down first. And I suddenly was back in Baltimore with a very light credit load because I was studying abroad, and a house that was all to myself. And I was like, all right, I need to get a handle on this because it is genuinely making life unbearable. So I got back in touch with my registered dietitian, and I had always been talking to my therapist even while abroad, but not about my body image or my eating disorder. And I took recovery on. And through April and May, it was hard. It was something that I still convinced myself I wasn't really going through, that I wasn't really struggling with. And then around the end of the semester, my dietitian informed me that in order to keep me on for the summer, there was just like a little bit of a schedule change in order to keep me on for the summer, and that she was only keeping on 3 people, and I was one of them. And that was kind of a moment where I was like, oh, so this isn't just like a quirky little thing that I'm like kind of dealing with. Like this is a genuine bona fide struggle that is worth addressing, so much so that my dietitian is keeping me on as one of the 3 people she's addressing throughout the summer. So I also got to a point we went to a scheduled eating plan before we recently have started to transition into a more intuitive eating approach. And I just found myself thinking about food at all times. My eating disorder manifested in more of a restrict and binge cycle. And just the breaking that cycle was just so hard, and dealing with feeling hunger throughout the day and feeling fullness throughout the day was very new and very hard. And I also remember feeling like it was an addiction, but harder to overcome than addiction, because you can't just go sober from food. You have to continue to eat. And that was another point where I was like, I'm really struggling with something. And so I really, really committed to recovery. And one of the issues that I ran into was I was feeling very alone. I didn't have any guy friends that I knew of who were open about being in recovery, though I do know many, many men who have eating disorders, but I don't think that a lot of them know that they have eating disorders. Or if they do, they haven't labeled them, and they certainly aren't addressing them. But I didn't have any peers to talk to about it, about recovery. And I turned to the internet. I tried to find any guys on TikTok who were talking about it. There were none. And I tried to find any guys in general who were talking about it, and there were none. And then I tried to find a nonprofit devoted to men with eating disorders, or even a website with resources for men with eating disorders. And there was literally nothing. And then I was like, I'm apparently bad at using Google, because this is impossible. It actually cannot be so that there's nothing out there for men with eating disorders. So I talked to my dietitian and my therapist about it. I was like, can you guys please look for resources? And they also came up short with absolutely nothing. And they were like, we're so sorry. And luckily I had them, and knew them as a team that was so great and kept me grounded and kept me from disqualifying myself from having an eating disorder. They continued to validate that I was going through something, because a lot of guys don't have that. And a lot of people in general don't have that. And so time went on. I've been doing really, really well with recovery. And I started carving pumpkins in October on TikTok. I was like, I'm not a TikToker. I can't post on TikTok. But I started carving pumpkins. My second pumpkin I carved was of the muses from the Disney movie Hercules, and it went super mega viral. And I suddenly, like, I carved 18 pumpkins in October. I had this platform where I was doing that. It was super non-controversial. It was really fun, and it ended when pumpkin season ended, and I was glad when it did, because I was starting to like develop hand cramps on the daily, and I was like, I have this platform now, and I don't know what to do with it. And I tried out a few different things, and I still post things that aren't related to my eating disorder on occasion, because I'm a much more well-rounded person than just having one issue to talk about. But I started posting stuff that related to being a man in eating disorder recovery, because I was like, well, I can be the person I needed, and I'm in a good place in my recovery. So why not spread that wealth? That's one of my personal values, that if you have privilege, and I consider being in a good place in your recovery a privilege, because that means that you've had access to the resources that allow you to recover. I consider that a privilege, and I believe in allowing privilege to trickle down. I believe in distribution of resources that not everyone has access to. So I started to post on TikTok, and I had one that was about men with eating disorders, and it named quite a few statistics, and it started to go viral, and I was very excited about it. There were men reaching out to me who were saying things like, I have been in denial that I have an eating disorder for so long, and this is my sign. I'm finally going to do it. Thank you for this video. I feel seen. And other people saying, I didn't even know men could have eating disorders. I thought it was just a female issue. And I was like, wow, that is crazy, that it's that underrepresented, that people don't even know men can have eating disorders. And I expected to wake up the next morning and like continue these conversations, because I was having these conversations, like actively commenting back to every single person commenting. I was having these conversations until like 3 a.m. that night. I woke up the next morning, and TikTok had taken the video down, and they were like, this violates our community guidelines. And I couldn't, and like, it literally didn't. Like, I read their community guidelines, and it said, under the part that talked about eating disorders, they were like, recovery content is allowed and encouraged. And I was like, so why is this taken down? And I tried to repost the video, and they wouldn't let me. They were like, this is the same video, you can't fool us. And so I got a little emotional, and I made a video that was like, TikTok took down my video talking about men with eating disorders, so please blow this one up to show them that, one, I didn't violate any community guidelines, and two, men with eating disorders deserve visibility. And that one really, really blew up. And I gained an obscene amount of followers in a very short amount of time. And I have continued to make content that is pro-recovery since. And I am very excited and honored to have been given this platform.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all of that. And I'm excited too. And I think it's really beautiful what you had said about wanting to be the person you needed.
Yeah.
You know, be the voice, the representation that you needed. Speaking of those, so I want to talk, I want to dive into, you know, the arts and appearance focused culture and all of these things, and also talking about the statistics, all of the things about your story. So it's really common, and you mentioned this, for our culture, our appearance obsessed culture, to primarily focus on women. Like you said, people were like, I didn't even know men could have eating disorders, which even hearing that, like, it's like a part of me is like, I understand why people would think that. And then there's this other part of me of like, who's like shocked that, you know, but what are some of the messages or ways that you and other men, and maybe even gay men in particular, but, you know, if there's something in particular to them, What messages impact them in our culture? Like, how does the messages that you guys receive, if they're different, that contribute to disordered eating and eating disorders and body dysmorphia?
So there are a lot of ways in which men get ideas about what their body should look like. There is just as strong messaging in advertisement and in media for guys that there is for girls. It's not necessarily as systematic and structured, and I don't want to make a false equivalency between the level of pressure we put on women to look a certain way. And I don't think that it is, in fact, equal. But I do know for a fact that it heavily impacts men. If your child at 11 or 12, who is a guy, starts wearing a shirt in the pool and like not taking his shirt off, it's a pretty good sign that your child is dealing with body dysmorphia. And that is coming from depictions of men in movies, in advertisements. Not everyone has a six-pack. Not everyone can have a six-pack. And often you'll hear people obsessed with the idea of having a six-pack. It's not realistic for a lot of people. And men really go through it. Gay men in particular go through it. And I think that one of the worst avenues for this is consumption of pornography, actually. Gay men and straight men alike, consume a lot of pornography. And in pornography, almost always the person is muscular and thin with very little body fat. Or maybe not thin, maybe they're muscular. There are two different types. There are two different types of body dysmorphia that are constantly tugging at a man. One is muscle dysmorphia, which is just kind of like the guy version of body dysmorphia. And then there's also, like body dysmorphia that is like, am I thin enough? Do I have too much fat on my body? But it's also like, am I big enough? Do I have enough muscle? Which again is not a realistic standard for most men to achieve. But there's this idea in society that, like, in order to be masculine, you have to have sex appeal. And when you are taught by this thing that you're consuming all the time, that in order to have sex appeal, you have to look this way, and you don't look that way, that really screws with your perception. As well as a gay man, mind you, my Instagram consumption, like the things I like on Instagram, have nothing to do with me being gay. Like, they're just my friends' photos. But Instagram figured out that I was gay. And my Explore feed was nothing but shirtless gay influencers that were super muscular and really pretty. And that's it. No idea how Instagram figured that out, but that was all my Instagram was for the longest time. Whenever I logged on, there was my Explore page filled with a bunch of very, very beautiful Photoshopped gay men. And that's harmful messaging. And I think that the root of this issue that male eating disorders aren't visible is actually misogyny, as is most any issue in society can be rooted to misogyny or racism, which are, both gender and race are social constructs, but we are so deeply rooted in these things that they're inescapable, and they form every single other problem we have in society. That, and also wealth disparity, racism, classism, and misogyny are the biggest issues that I think most issues also stem from. And so how that relates to men with eating disorders is that you are seen as less of a man for having an eating disorder because eating disorders are labeled as a female issue, as well as women have different bodies than men do. Like, like people who are traditionally female sex have different bodies than people who are traditionally male sex, like assigned male from birth. And the female anatomy has more fat built into it to protect reproductive organs, which men don't have inside of their bodies. Like we have them externally. And it is unrealistic to expect a woman to have a flat stomach and be healthy generally. And you know, there are always exceptions to that. And I'm not meaning to shame anyone for what the size of their body is. At any size, your body is worthy of love and respect. But it is seen on men as less manly to have any kind of fat on your body, because that is seen as a more feminine trait. To not have really defined muscles, to not have a completely flat stomach, is seen as less manly. And that comes from Greco-Roman ideals of beauty. It comes from those statues that they made, the marble statues, and you know, trickled down into the Judeo-Christian society. And you know, we're a product of that. So here we are with those same beauty standards and ideals.
Yeah, that was very well said and very articulate.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I can really see exactly what you're saying and how it influences guys, little boys, just as much, like with what cartoon characters look like and Marvel characters and Spider-Man. And
I mean, and that's another thing that I didn't even get into, because that's a little farther from my experience. Because I've never been much of a superhero film viewer, but those people are put on steroids to look like that. They're modified in post-production.
yeah, like CGI.
Yeah, like we give little boys these ideas. Also, like they're the wrestler toys. There's G.I. Joe, which has a perfect six-pack, you know, like that we and then sports as well. Like there, and that's also another thing. High school sports in particular, not just sports in the media, but high school sports, wrestlers in particular, are told that they have to maintain a certain weight class.
Mm-hmm.
And so will do extreme disordered eating in order to maintain their weight class. Because we're not meant to, one, know our weight really, and two, maintain a weight exactly. Like that's an impossible thing to ask of someone. And that it can't be achieved without resorting to things like extreme disordered eating. And for some guys, it's not emotional. And so it's just disordered eating. But if your disordered eating becomes emotional, if you have emotional attachment to your disordered eating, it's an eating disorder.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Yeah. Emotional attachment, I think, is I do think that's a really nice distinction of like, it's the degree to which you are emotionally attached to eating a certain way or looking a certain way that kind of fucks you up. And if you're not super emotionally attached, then
yeah.
So let's talk about performance-based communities. You did speak to this a little bit. So, and you've already talked about athletics and musical theater. You know, these are two things, I don't know what I want to call them, you know, they're two cool things that you can participate in that often encourage activities, hobbies. They often encourage appearance obsessed culture. So share with us your experience, you know, being in musical theater, your experience with this appearance-based culture, the obsessive thinking, the competitive thinking. You know, how did you break out of that? Maybe you're still working on it, but what did that look like for you?
I mean, I definitely am still working on it. I'm still in recovery. And I'd like to add that, you know, when you're a kid, these things are maybe hobbies. And sometimes they continue as hobbies into adulthood. But for a lot of people, they become careers. And when your career is tied to the way your body looks, that is a whole new level of screwing with your mind. Because it's not only like, I can't accept my body because society won't accept me. in this body. It's also like, I will not get a paycheck. My livelihood depends on the way I look, which is completely unfair and should not be the situation, because one of the qualifications to be an artist is not having a six pack or having a completely flat tummy. There are plenty of people who are fantastic at ballet who are size diverse, and those people are very strong because they've dealt with a lot to stay in ballet and continue to get that training as someone who is in a larger body. Because a lot of ballet teachers will criticize larger bodied people for being larger bodied, and it might cause an eating disorder, or for people who are extremely emotionally aware and aware of the potential to develop an eating disorder, they might just quit ballet so that it doesn't impact their mental health any further, which is really sad because it's a beautiful art form. But dance is a huge part of musical theater. And it's a body image, like the image of your body, the perception of your body is important in acting as well. Unfortunately, when it comes to getting a job, it should not be that way. But also, it's rooted in this this history of acting and of any kind of performance, of performers also being sex workers. There's this idea that performers have to have sex appeal in order to be performers, because otherwise no one is going to want to watch them. That is simply not true. People make wonderful art without having sex appeal. And the idea that sex appeal is necessary to make good art is one that comes from diet culture and capitalism.
Yeah, to sell products for sure. Yeah. I'm curious if you think so based on your experience, or unless you've read statistics about this, I don't know, but do you think that in performance-based places, whether it's like singing, dancing, acting, do you think the same amount of men and women struggle with and engage in, diet culture mentality and types of behaviors?
I would say, and I don't have statistics on this because I don't think it's something that many people have looked into in order for there to be statistics defined on it. And maybe there are, and if there are, you're welcome to reach out to me and give them to me. I'm very, very interested in reading them if you find some. But I think that to a certain degree, women will always proportionally have a little bit more of a majority when it comes to the percentage of people who have eating disorders, just because, like I said, I think a lot of the culture around men with eating disorders is rooted in misogyny, and misogyny directly attacks women as the subject of hatred. And so for that reason, I think that there will always be at least slightly more women than men who are impacted. And that also applies to musical theater because this is a statistic I know in terms of like getting into a college program for musical theater. 1 in 4 applicants for a BFA musical theater program is a guy. And women, especially in the industry, are treated like a dime a dozen, which is not fair and really invalidating to female artists. But we also, another misogyny thing, is we teach women that the arts are feminine and that sports and business and the white collar careers are masculine. And so you have more women go into the arts. And like, because of that, there are more qualifications to root out a female applicant to an arts program or to an artistic job. So if you are equally as talented as the other woman in consideration, it's very possible that the reason you don't get it is because you're not the right size to fit the costume, and they don't want to adjust the costume. So I think that it is, in fact, harder for women in musical theater. But there is also, like, to add on to that, a ton of stigma around the male body, and how it should be perceived. I was told at one point at one of the institutions I've trained at that I needed to slim down and bulk up. That was a direct quote told to me. In order to get hired, I needed to slim down and bulk up.
Which goes back to exactly what you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, I mean, that summer was probably one of the worst summers I've ever had because I partook in extremely disordered eating and extremely like unhealthy relationship with exercise that, you know, it wasn't sustainable, it wasn't good.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad that I'm no longer in that place. But like also goes to show you that the words that you say to people have an extreme impact.
Yeah, huge.
Also goes for why diets and exercise regimens should not be conversations that we have socially, and especially not professionally.
What do you mean with that last bit?
Meaning that, you know, not only in arts, to draw this out to other careers, I think that this insurance-based trend of like the biggest loser stuff at jobs is really, really awful. Like the idea of winning a prize for who loses the most weight because it'll make the insurance cheaper for the company is just absolutely absurd. One, we shouldn't be basing insurance and access to healthcare on size because it has actually very little to do with actual health, and it's a fat-phobic misperception. But also, it's really harmful to people actively. I remember my elementary school did it with the teachers. And my mom is an elementary school teacher. And I grew up around every year there was a Biggest Loser competition.
Wow. Yeah.
Like that's just one of the things that I observed as a child. That like losing weight is a very good thing. And that it is a goal, so much so that like the elementary school teacher staff was all participating in trying to lose weight.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that in. You know, I've had a lot of clients that I've worked with who talk about like, okay, my company's doing a weight loss thing. And I do know that you often are charged less for your insurance if you have a quote normal BMI. So it's absolutely a tool for discrimination and limits people's access to healthcare, not to mention you're encouraging something that isn't rooted in science, which is dieting and long-term sustainable weight loss. I mean, it's a whole huge conversation, but I'm glad you brought that in there. It's hugely problematic for sure. I want to talk about male ED visibility a little bit further, a little bit more. You know, most research is conducted on females. An estimated 25 to 40% of men make up all eating disorder cases, but I actually think it's probably hard to get an exact number because men are so much less likely to reach out for help. So I think it's hard to really trust the statistics, but why do you think it's so hard for men to speak up? Like, if you haven't already said it, is there more to why you think they don't speak up? Or is there messages in particular that keep them quiet that may be separate from just it not being seen as a manly issue? Is there more there?
I think a lot of the time when we're struggling with something, the current trend in terms of like where do you go for answers is go to Google. And when you go to Google and you search up men with eating disorders, there is almost nothing to be read. And that is invalidating. That can leave a man thinking, I'm not actually going through something. And so I need to be quiet, man up, and deal with it. I think that is a huge part of it. But also for the few men who do recognize that they have an eating disorder, recognize that they're actually struggling, most recovery facilities that are inpatient or intensive outpatient are female only. And so if you're a man who recognizes that you have an eating disorder in the middle of nowhere, you're in some Midwestern state, you reach out to the recovery facility in your area and it's exclusively for women, you're left with no options for treatment. That's horrifying.
Yeah, like that's awful.
And so it leads a lot of men to either tell themselves that they're not actually going through something, so that they don't have to deal with the the rejection and the upsetting nature of finding out that like you are dealing with something and you just don't have any options. Or you do accept that. You accept that you're dealing with something and you don't have any options. And I don't think either of those are good options. So I think that that is a big reason why men with eating disorders struggle. But also, this is an issue for trans men and for non-binary people who are more mask presenting, because they often feel like their gender is put into question by this eating disorder. Often a trans man or a non-binary person will develop an eating disorder prior to transition or prior to coming out. And they're already dealing with a great deal of gender dysphoria because they are existing within a body that they don't feel comfortable with to begin with, for many, many reasons, much more than most people have to deal with. And then on top of that, they feel like their gender is coming into question because they have a mental health issue that is only really visible in the media for women. And as a non-binary person or a trans man looking for help, not seeing any cisgender men talk about their eating disorders is incredibly invalidating when all you see is a sea of cisgender women talking about their eating disorders, because it makes you believe that you are less of a man for having an eating disorder. And that's something I really, really like to hammer in to my messaging, is that if you are a trans man, you are no less of a man than me, period. And we both have eating disorders.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. Yeah, and I really think it's great that you're speaking up. Creating a mirror for people, you know, to be reflected back to, I think is healing in and of itself. So I want to talk about reaching out for help. You have this great TikTok. It's so good. You have this analogy of paper cuts and deeper cuts, both needing treatment and care. How does this analogy apply to struggling with food and asking for help?
For a long time, I told myself that I could not be struggling because I wasn't going through something severe enough to get help. And that is actually a symptom of having an eating disorder, or actually any mental health problem. I also have anxiety and depression, and both of them also, I experienced this sense of, I don't actually have anxiety. I am just appropriating the experience of a person with anxiety for attention. But the fallacy in that idea is that I wasn't telling anyone about it. I couldn't have been doing it for attention, because who was I getting attention from? Myself? That's mental illness. And it's the same thing with an eating disorder. Your eating disorder is telling you it's not an eating disorder because you can't fight an enemy that you haven't named. Second you name an enemy, you can start combating them. But if you're trying to shoot without a target, you're not going to hit it. So you have to identify the target, and the target is your eating disorder. The target is your anxiety. The target is your depression, you know? But you're not going to hit a target when you're like, I don't have a target to hit. And then also that target is talking to you and saying, I'm not a target. And then you're just like, okay. Like that's really unfortunate that we go through that, because often, like, what you're perceiving as a paper cut is actually a really deep wound. And that's something we don't really do with physical issues. If you had a gash in your skin, you wouldn't be like, a paper cut. Like, like you're bleeding out. You need to go to a hospital. Like, it's very obvious to anyone who looks at you with that gash in your skin that you need to go to a hospital. And additionally, with this paper cut analogy, to take it further, let's say it is a paper cut. Paper cuts untreated, or small cuts untreated, get infected. And if your cut gets infected, it becomes a much more serious issue. Small wounds become deep wounds if you don't treat the small wounds. And just to be blatant, less severe eating disorders become worse eating disorders if you leave them untreated.
100%. That's a great analogy. I really love it. I think it's helpful. So is there any other reason why it might be hard for people to ask for help, or like aside from your eating disorder telling you it's not that big of an issue, it's just a paper cut, ignore it, right? Or you not being validated in your struggles because there's a lack of resource and a lack of representation, which are, again, those are really big issues. Let's just say someone is struggling to ask for help, rather. What would you say to them? What advice would you have? How would you want to support somebody in speaking up and asking for help?
So this is kind of a two-part recommendation. To people who have resources, such as health insurance, and people who have supportive parents who believe that mental health is an actual thing. You are the lucky ones. You have those resources. They are privileges. Utilize them. If you have access to therapy, get a therapist. If you have the ability to have a registered dietitian, get a registered dietitian. You are in a privileged position by having access to that medical care. You need to take advantage of it. And anyone who cares about you, and hopefully in that situation you are cared about, you should be able to get support from them. And sometimes that's your friends. And if your friends don't support you, they're not actually your friends. So that's my message to people with resources. If you don't have those resources, if you don't have health insurance, if you don't have a wealth of money, which obviously often coincide, you are not any less valid because you're not able to get a diagnosis. Your mental health problems don't suddenly exist because someone has diagnosed them. Diagnoses are a privilege, and obviously it's helpful to get one, but if you are able to come up with an idea of what you might be going through, if you feel like you are struggling with eating and it is emotional and you don't know where to reach for help, and everywhere you can think of reaching might reject the notion that you are struggling, try to take it into your own hands by buying the Intuitive Eating Workbook, for example. And I also recommend the book by Christy Harrison that just came out, Anti-Diet, is very, very good. Very good read. Absolutely add it to your bookshelf, read it. And also follow recovery accounts from people who are not professionals, who are going through what you're going through, like me. And also there are many dietitians who are on social media that create free content to help educate you on nutrition, what a good relationship with food looks like. That information is available, but you need to identify that you are struggling with eating and that it is emotional in order to look for those resources. Additionally, as a little like tag on here, if you are a larger bodied person being denied care because someone looks at you and says you don't have a BMI that qualifies to have an eating disorder, which is a bullshit statement in its own, or that like you don't look like you have an eating disorder. Eating disorders don't have a look to them. There are plenty of larger bodied people who actually are suffering with anorexia. Not everyone looks like that middle school picture that you saw in the little PowerPoint in your middle school health class. And some people do, and those people deserve help too. But for the majority of people, they don't, and they're still struggling, and they're not any less valid for that reason. And if you have professionals, when you reach out for help, that say that you don't deserve treatment because of a way you look, you don't deserve treatment because you're a man, you don't deserve treatment because you should be going on a diet anyway, you need to lose weight for your health, which is also a completely ridiculous statement. Those people are not advocates for you. Those people should not be giving you health care because they don't prioritize your health. and you need health providers who prioritize your health.
Cosign. Well said. Definitely agree with you. So we have a couple minutes left here. I want to talk about how diet culture and eating disorder overlap. So you have this really cute TikTok with Mary Kate and Ashley Olsen singing a song about being twins. And actually, one of my clients sent it to me. That's how I found you. Was one of my clients sent it to me. Yeah. So how are diet culture and eating disorder the same thing? Diet culture and eating disorder culture, how do they overlap? What do you see?
So diet culture is, to simplify, an invention of capitalism that is meant to monetize body issues that society has instilled upon you to monetize the body issues that they've given you. I don't want to use a false figure. I believe that last year or in a recent year, the diet industry made $72 billion, which is an absurd figure because the failure rate of diets is between 90 and 98%. And what does failure rate mean? Failure rate means that you go on this weight loss diet, and then within months or a year or a few years, you are back in this, you were back at your natural set point because your body is fighting to keep you back in that place where it is comfortable, where it is healthiest. Your body fights to get you back to your natural set point. If your natural set point is in a larger body and you went on an extreme diet to be in a smaller body, you are going to eventually end up back in a larger body. And we would not accept that kind of failure rate from any other industry. If I sell you a phone and I tell you, here's the smartphone, give me $1,000 for it, it's probably going to stop working in a week. You're gonna slap me in the face and be like, absolutely not. What are you why would you try to sell that to me? But it's so much more personal when it's our bodies. And we're taught, it's under the guise of we're not healthy. We are given eating disorders by this invention of capitalism just so that people can make money. And so that's how they are the same thing. The culture around eating disorders is diet culture.
Yeah, I think it's a breeding ground. You know, I think we have some statistical data. I've read a couple of things about how eating disorders, you know, have existed before diet culture, but they were very rare. After diet culture, or they've done a study in Fiji where they exposed Western culture to Fijian women who hadn't had access to it before. And there was no existence of any eating disorders on Fiji prior to being showed. Melrose Place, I think, was the TV show that they like brought over there. And then the prevalence of eating disorders skyrocketed. And so I love.
May I just say, like, what an incredibly unethical study to like.
They didn't intentionally bring it over there. They just got Western media. Like
Yeah.
they just,
Okay,
yeah.
right.
They weren't like, let's see if it causes eating disorders. No.
Wow. Okay. Good. No, but yeah, no, that like, that is a very, very like stunning thing to know. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, it's okay. I'm glad you did, because if you were confused, that means there was potentially listeners that were confused. So I believe it was in Renee Anglim's book, Beauty Sick, is where I had first read about this study where they just gained access to like TV and Western media. And then all of a sudden they had this uptick in them. And so I do agree with you that, you know, diet culture is a huge contributing factor. Like you don't have to experience capital T trauma to develop an eating disorder. You don't even have to necessarily have like mental health issues in your family to develop an eating disorder. But if you live in diet culture, it's a breeding ground for them. So I'm with you on that for sure. Okay, one last fun question to wrap us up, William. This has been so fun to listen to you speak. You speak so eloquently and articulately. What are you most excited about in life right now?
God, what am I most excited about? I'm really excited about everything that's going on. I have become somewhat of a public figure suddenly, and not. I would not say that I necessarily deserve it, because I also believe that the second you genuinely believe that you deserve your platform, like that's the moment you don't. Um, and I am very grateful for this opportunity to help people. I struggled for a long time with this idea that I felt like, and this is a bit of a false perception, but I felt like acting and theater had such a high barrier to entry for consumption. Uh, Only rich, often white people end up being able to attend the theater. And as an actor who works primarily on stage, that's a horrifying thing to realize, because even if you're doing work that contributes to social justice, or like allegedly contributes to social justice, often that wealthy, privileged theater goer is going to walk out of that theater thinking that they have done action to help that issue by viewing your performance, and not actually feel compelled to act on the things that they might have learned or observed through the theater. Which is an issue with Western theater and the way that we see it manifest. And so for a long time, I struggled with, I feel like I have this mind that really wants to help people, and I'm going into a career where I'm simply not. And so it's very exciting for me that I get to wake up every day and help people while also still being able to partake in acting and making music. I'm writing music right now, and I'm probably going to come out with an EP later this year, and I'm very excited about that. I've always wanted to write music and felt like I wasn't a true artist and didn't really have anything worth saying, which is actually just another symptom of having an eating disorder, this idea that you don't deserve to take up space. And I think that that also applied to my presence as an artist. And that has changed for me, and I'm very excited about that. I feel like I'm making art that is good and that I care about. And I'm excited about life at the moment. And that's a great position to be in.
Mm. Like quick yes or no question, but was there a time in the middle of your eating disorder where you weren't excited about life? And do you think your recovery's played a role in you being excited?
Absolutely. When you're eating consistently and more, and also you're not so focused on hating everything about yourself, including the very fundamental things of existing in a body and eating to fuel that body, having more energy definitely makes life more enjoyable.
Yeah, big time. Yeah. This has been so awesome. I've had such a great time chatting with you. If people want to connect with you, they want to learn more, they want to watch your incredible TikTok videos, where can they find you? Where should they go?
So I'm very new to all of this. I will have a website someday. I currently do not. But if you want to get in contact with me, my TikTok is at William Carved Pumpkins, carved past tense, because I used to carve pumpkins, if you remember, and now I don't. And my Instagram is at William Hornby, which is just my name. And I will get a website linked to those relatively soon. And hopefully my email will be attached to that. So you can contact me through that when it does exist.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Also the best way to get in contact with me, like directly, is to join one of my lives when I go live on TikTok. I generally see most of the comments that are made in a live. I'm less responsive to like direct messages on Instagram. So if you really want to hear from me, comment on one of my videos or comment in one of my lives, and I will try to get back to you.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for adding that in. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for tuning into this amazing episode with William. Be sure to click the picture to subscribe to my channel and check out another amazing episode of the Love Your Bod Pod.